to the Daily Bite. I'm your host, Pastor Steve Andrews. Let's read 1 Kings chapter 5. Now Hiram, king of Tyre, sent his servants to Solomon when he heard that they had anointed him king in place of his father, for Hiram always loved David. And Solomon sent word to Hiram, "You know that David my father could not build a house for the name of Yahweh his God, because of the warfare with which his enemies surrounded him, until Yahweh put them under the soles of his feet. But now Yahweh my God has given me rest on every side. There is neither adversary nor misfortune, and so I intend to build a house for the name of Yahweh my God, as Yahweh said to David my father, your son, whom I will set on your throne in your place, shall build the house for my name. Now therefore, command that cedars of Lebanon be cut for me, and my servants will join your servants, and I will pay you for your servants such wages as you set, for you know that there is no one among us who knows how to cut timber like the Sidonians." As soon as Hiram heard the words of Solomon, he rejoiced greatly, and said, "Blessed be Yahweh this day, who has given to David a wise son to be over this great people." And Hiram sent to Solomon, saying, "I have heard the message that you have sent to me. I am ready to do all you desire in the matter of the cedar and cypress timber. My servants shall bring it down to the sea from Lebanon, and I will make it into rafts to go by sea to the place you direct. And I will have them broken up there, and you shall receive them. And you shall meet my wishes by providing food for my household." So Hiram supplied Solomon with all the timber of cedar and cypress that he desired, while Solomon gave Hiram 20,000 cores of wheat as food for his household, and 20,000 cores of beaten oil. Solomon gave this to Hiram year by year. And Yahweh gave Solomon wisdom as he promised him, and there was peace between Hiram and Solomon, and the two of them made a treaty. King Solomon drafted forced labor out of all Israel, and the draft numbered 30,000 men, and he sent them to Lebanon, 10,000 a month in shifts. They would be a month in Lebanon and 2 months at home. Adoniram was in charge of the draft. Solomon also had 70,000 burden bearers and 80,000 stone cutters in the hill country, besides Solomon's 3,300 chief officers who were over the work, who had charge of the people who had carried on the work. At the king's command they quarried out great costly stones in order to lay the foundation of the house with dressed stones. So Solomon's builders and Hiram's builders and the men of Gebal did the cutting and prepared the timber and the stone to build the house. This is the word of the Lord. Tyre and Sidon are mentioned here in the text, and we talked about yesterday the expanse of Solomon's kingdom. Tyre and Sidon are not part of it, although they're close. I mean, they're bordered to it. So as you look at a map, you can find them just along the Mediterranean Sea, on the east side of the sea, just north of where Israel is. They're port cities. They're well known, and they get mentioned quite a bit, actually, in the Old Testament and the New Testament as well, because of that location that they have. So Hiram is the king there, and Hiram, we have the note in verse 1, loved David, and so he's happy to work with his son Solomon. When he hears of Solomon's wisdom, when he hears Solomon's request, he rejoices and he gives thanks to Yahweh, to the God of Israel. Whether he is faithful or not is not mentioned in the text. Whether he's a polytheist and believes in many gods, not mentioned to us. But he blesses Yahweh. Now, what does it mean for a person to bless God? Now, the one who does the blessing, it depends on the direction of stuff. So if you're talking about a higher authority blessing the lower, it's the idea of a gift of some kind. So when God blesses us, he is giving us a gift, whether it's the blessing of life, the blessing of forgiveness, however you want to look at that. When the lower blesses the higher, it tends to be glorifying them, pointing to them, thanking them, those kinds of things. And so Hiram here is rejoicing. He's giving thanks to God for this great wisdom. Now, we got to back up to the first paragraph still, to Solomon's actual request here. He mentions what we know from the past history of Scripture, that David was not allowed to build Yahweh's house, the temple for him. You can read about that in 2 Samuel chapter 7, and that's going to be where Solomon's pulling from in verse 5 as he makes that quotation. But now, so David's reasoning here, why God did not allow David to do it, was because he was a man of war. But Solomon is not. Solomon has great prosperity and great peace. We see that. Verse 4, God has given me rest on every side. So he admits where the source is, right? The source of his peace and prosperity is from God. That's good. That's a faithful response here. He has neither adversary, so no enemy, nor misfortune. Not even bad things. Tragedies and events are happening in Israel under his reign. So he intends to build a house. Now this is a spot where you can turn and ask your kids a question and maybe have a little fun together building something. If you were going to build a house, what would you use to build it? What materials would you make it from? You think of the walls and things. What would you build it out of? Again, little kids would have some probably funny answers to that, but you're going to build it with the best materials that you can afford. And with the great prosperity that Israel has here, there's nothing that's out of reach. So he goes straight for the best. The cedars of Lebanon are, I don't want to overspeak it, but in terms of the Old Testament, the culture of that ancient Near East, I think it's almost fair to call them legendary for how great this lumber is. And so he goes straight for it. And in verse 6, what do you see him say? Wages as you set. Solomon essentially tells Hiram, name your price and I'll pay it. Yeah, he's not concerned about money. All right, he does then pay that compliment to Hiram, as he says, there is no one among us who knows how to cut timber like the Sidonians. So that's a great compliment as he's trying to get Hiram to work with him. Now Hiram, in his response, says he's ready, he's willing to have this business partnership going, and he's going to use the sea. So that, again, Tyre and Sidon are port cities on the Mediterranean Sea. So he's going to put these timbers together, tying them up to make a raft, and he's going to sail those rafts down the sea south until they get close to Jerusalem, at which point they'll have to be broken apart and then carried somehow from the sea about 35 miles across land to get to Jerusalem. So it's not going to be easy work by any means. What is Hiram's price? Verse 9, you shall meet my wishes by providing food for my household. So we read about how Solomon's family ate yesterday. Today we get to read about how Hiram's family eats, and Solomon agrees to this, and his price that he meets for the feeding of Hiram's family, 20,000 cores of wheat, 20,000 cores of beaten oil annually. He would give that each year. Yesterday with Solomon's family, we read that 30 cores of wheat would feed, with the meat and other stuff too, would feed probably about 1,500 people a day. So if you're using that same kind of a measurement here, this would be, if it were the same number of people, you could stretch this to 666 days worth of food. So Hiram's house might simply be bigger, his household, and more people to feed, or Solomon's just sending an abundance, which, either's possible. Even a combination of the two is possible, I suppose. The estimate I saw is that 20,000 cores of wheat could be gathered from about 12 acres worth of land. So Solomon's going to still have plenty more at home for himself and for his people. Now, we see peace between Hiram and Solomon. That's good. But we get verse 13. King Solomon drafted forced labor out of all Israel. This is one of the warnings that Yahweh had given to his people back in 1 Samuel chapter 8 when they were demanding a king for themselves. They no longer wanted Yahweh as king. They wanted a man to serve them. God warned them that that king would do many wicked things. And here we see Solomon doing just that. Not the first box on the list that's been checked off, and they're only on their third king. I mean, it's all checked off at this point already. So 30,000 men drafted. 10,000 are going to work in the 3 different shifts. So they would go to Lebanon and work for a month alongside of Hiram's servants, and then they would return to their homes for 2 months while another group went out. So just a rotation there for as long as needed until the temple is completed. The same with the annual donation of food to Hiram. Well, not donation, but payment. Adoniram is mentioned as being in charge of the draft. We saw him yesterday in chapter 4, verse 6, as the one who is in charge of all the forced labor. So, certainly connected. When you add up all these men, you come to 183,300 men total, with the forced labor, the burden bearers, the stone cutters, and the officers over the work. So lots and lots of people involved in harvesting the resources needed to build the temple. We see that again in verse 17 as they quarry out, so quarry, they get rock, costly stones to lay the foundations. We're going to see more about the temple too as we move forward, but that's just a starting point. They're gathering the timber and the stone necessary to build the temple. Two things as you wrap up today. If your children don't know what the temple is, a little recap there is helpful. The temple replaces the tabernacle, which is the place where God's throne is, where he reigns in the midst of his people, where he will speak to his people, where they are to bring their sacrifices, their offerings that are even good for forgiveness of sins, as we see in the book of Leviticus. But we learn in the New Testament, all of that's only temporary, that there is a better temple. Love that picture from the book of Hebrews. Everything is better when it comes to Jesus. He is the better temple. His is the better sacrifice. He is the better priest. And so you've got those connections, and you can ask your kids to make that connection. What happens to the temple in the New Testament? Why is there no temple today? And worldly politics aside, we as Christians, we do not have a need for there to be a third temple. Or a fourth, depending on how you want to number them, but you tend to hear the number 3 today. We don't need a new temple to be built. Jesus is the temple. So that's a focal point in both the Old and the New Testament, the temple of God, where he reigns for his people and speaks to them. Jesus is our King, and he speaks to us in his word. So he is the temple of God, and his sacrifice, laying down his own life for us. So you've got those New Testament verses, Jesus speaking, saying something along the lines of, destroy this temple and I will rebuild it in 3 days. And the Pharisees get upset because it took 46 years to build the temple that they had at that point. But Jesus was talking about his death on Good Friday and his resurrection on Easter morning.